This is SpaceTime Series 27, Episode 60, for broadcast on the 17th of May, 2024. Coming up on SpaceTime, one of the most ancient stars ever seen in another galaxy, NASA's Hubble Space Telescope goes offline following a gyroscope issue, and Snoopy launched into space. All that and more coming up on SpaceTime.
Welcome to SpaceTime with Stuart Gary.
Astronomers have discovered one of the most ancient stars ever seen in another galaxy. It's an important find because it'll help lead us to one of the holy grails of astronomy, that is, the discovery of the very first generation of stars. These first-generation stars, so-called population 3 stars, transform the universe. They brought the cosmos out of the cosmic dark ages before the first stars were formed and into the epoch of reionization, when ultraviolet light from those first stars ionized the universe, making it appear clear as we see it today. But these first-generation stars were very different from the stars we see around us today. For a start, they were created out of the pure hydrogen and helium formed in the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. After all, there were no other elements. Those elements were all formed from those first stars, either during their lifetimes or when they died. So, everything from the iron in the blood running through your veins to the calcium in your teeth and the sodium powering your thoughts were all first created by these most ancient of all stars. And being so pristine, these first stars are also thought to have been very different in appearance from the stars we see today. Astronomers think they're all very massive and extremely luminous, possibly hundreds of times bigger and brighter than today's big stars. And being so big, they would have burned through their nuclear fuel supplies very quickly. Like the James Deans of the stellar world, they would have lived fast and died young, living for maybe just a few million years or so, compared to the 12 billion year lifespan our sun's expected to have. Because of their short lifespans, no one's been able to see one of these first-generation stars. But scientists do occasionally find unique stars formed directly out of their remains, so-called population 2 stars. Now, a report in the journal Nature Astronomy claims to have discovered one of these ancient population 2 stars in another galaxy. The study's lead author, Stuart from the University of Chicago, says the star provides a unique window on the very early element-forming processes in galaxies other than our own. See, astronomers have built up an idea of how these stars were enriched chemically, how they were influenced by the first stars in the universe, by looking at these population 2 stars in our own galaxy, the Milky Way. But what we don't know is whether or not these signatures are unique to the Milky Way, or whether it's pretty much the same in other galaxies as well. Chitty specializes in what's called stellar archaeology, reconstructing how the earliest generations of stars changed the universe in order to understand the properties of these first stars and the elements they produced. With no first-generation stars left in the visible universe, Chitty and colleagues are looking for stars that formed out of the ashes of that first generation. But it's hard work because even second-generation stars are incredibly ancient and rare. We've only ever found a handful in our own galaxy. And that's the problem. See, most stars in the universe, including our own sun, are the result of tens of thousands of generations, building up more and more heavy elements each time. Chitty says that maybe fewer than 1 in 100,000 stars in the Milky Way would be a second-generation star. So finding them is incredibly laborious. But he says it's worth it to get snapshots of what the universe would have looked like way back in time. In their outer layers, these population 2 stars are preserving the elements near where they were formed. So if you can find a very old star and get its chemical composition, you can understand what the chemical composition of the universe was like when that star was created billions of years ago. For this study, Chitty and colleagues aimed their telescopes at an unusual target, the stars that make up the Large Magellanic Cloud. The Large Magellanic Cloud is a bright satellite dwarf galaxy orbiting the Milky Way. It's visible to the unaided eye in the southern hemisphere. Now, because it's a separate independent galaxy from the Milky Way, its oldest stars were formed outside the Milky Way, thereby giving astronomers a chance to learn about whether conditions in another galaxy are the same as what they are in our galaxy, whether the early universe was uniform or whether it was different in different places. The authors searched for evidence of especially ancient stars in the Large Magellanic Cloud and catalogued 10 of them, first with the European Space Agency's Gaia satellite and then with the Magellan Telescope in Chile. And one of these stars immediately jumped out as an oddity. It had fewer heavier elements than any other star ever observed in the Large Magellanic Cloud. And that's the key. It means it was probably formed in the wake of the very first generation of stars. So it had not yet built up heavier elements over the course of repeated star births and deaths. As they mapped out the star's elements, they were surprised to see it had a lot less carbon than iron compared to what we see in ancient Milky Way stars. That's intriguing, and it suggests that perhaps carbon enhancement in the earliest generation as we see it in the Milky Way isn't universal. It suggests that on a cosmic scale, there are differences from place to place. The findings also corroborated other studies that have suggested the Large Magellanic Cloud is made up of far fewer stars early on compared to the Milky Way. Chitty says this discovery suggests there should be many of these very ancient stars in the Large Magellanic Cloud if you can look closely enough. This is space-time. Still to come, NASA's Hubble Space Telescope plunges into safe mode following ongoing gyroscope problems, and Snoopy launched into orbit. All that and more still to come on SpaceTime. NASA's Hubble Space Telescope is back in operation after suddenly entering safe mode last month due to an ongoing gyroscopic issue. Mission managers say the orbiting observatory's instruments are stable and the telescope is in good health. Hubble automatically entered safe mode when one of its 3 gyroscopes gave a faulty reading. The gyros measure the telescope's turn rates and are part of the system that determines which direction the telescope's pointing in. While in safe mode, science operations are suspended and the telescope waits for new directions from the ground. Now, this particular gyro also caused Hubble to enter safe mode back in November after returning similar faulty readings. Mission managers are currently working to try and identify permanent solutions. Now, if necessary, the spacecraft can be reconfigured to operate with only one gyro, with the other remaining gyro placed in reserve. The spacecraft actually had 6 new gyros installed during the 5th and final Space Shuttle servicing mission back in 2009. And to date, 3 of those gyros remain operational, including the one that's constantly experiencing fluctuations. NASA scientists like Hubble to use 3 gyros to maximize efficiency, but they could continue to make science observations using only 1 gyro if required. Launched back in 1990, Hubble has been observing the universe for more than 3 decades and recently celebrated its 34th anniversary. However, while mission managers were resolving the latest Hubble issue, NASA's exoplanet hunter, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite TESS, remained shut down after it too went offline. TESS initially stopped functioning back on April the 8th, but was returned to operations on the 17th. However, it shut down again just 6 days later. Scientists are now trying to determine if both shutdowns were caused by the same problem. TESS completed its primary science mission back in July 2020, and it finished its first extended mission in September 2022, and it's now underway in its second extended mission. This is space-time. Still to come, a new CubeSat called Snoopy launched from the International Space Station. And later in the science report, the first known example of a wild animal using a plant with medicinal properties to treat a wound. All that and more still to come on SpaceTime. A new CubeSat's been launched from the International Space Station. Called Snoopy, the Signals of Opportunity P-band investigation, the 6-unit CubeSat's designed to test new passive technologies to measure soil moisture and improve crop yields. The The spacecraft's testing a low-noise radio receiver designed to measure root zone soil moisture by harnessing radio signals produced by commercial satellites. The probe was initially launched into space back on March the 21st from the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida aboard a Dragon cargo ship as part of SpaceX's 30th commercial resupply mission for NASA. Once on station, Snoopy was released into low Earth orbit on April the 21st. Snoopy principal investigator Professor James Garrison from Purdue University says Signals of Opportunity will try to reutilize what already exists. It'll try and collect the P-band radio signals produced by many commercial telecommunications satellites and repurpose them for scientific applications. In this way, the instrument would maximize the value of space-based assets already in orbit, transforming existing radio signals into research tools. Garrison says by looking at what happens when satellite signals reflect off the Earth's surface, and then comparing that to signals that hadn't been reflected, scientists can extract important information about the surface where the signal's reflecting. P-band radio signals are powerful, penetrating the Earth's surface to a depth of around 30 centimeters. And this makes them ideal for studying root zone soil moisture and snow water equivalent. By monitoring the amount of water in the soil, scientists will get a good understanding of crop growth. Garrison says he can also monitor irrigation levels.
Snoopy is going to be the first technology demonstration of a new technique for measuring root zone soil moisture and snow water equivalent. So Signals of Opportunity tries to reutilize what already exists. There are all these communication satellites that are transmitting in these frequencies that would be of use to us. And by looking at what happens when they reflect off the surface of the Earth and comparing that to the signal that has not reflected, we can extract important properties of what's going on in the surface where the signal reflects. So by monitoring the amount of water in the soil, we get a good understanding of the forecast for crop growth. We can also more intelligently monitor irrigation, so we're not wasting water, we're not over-irrigating. Similarly, snow is very important because that's also a place where water is stored. It also has not been accurately measured globally with remote sensing. So there are some unknowns in terms of forecasting the availability of fresh water that comes from snow. So we're offering the first capability of directly measuring this root zone soil moisture. The reason we use satellites is because we can make these measurements globally. It's one thing to go out to one field and put some sensors in the ground. Understanding all of these processes globally require satellites. The antennas is another interesting part of this design. We're basically using communications antennas. And one of the problems in working with low frequency signals is the need for a large antenna. And we're using the CubeSat platform because it's a standard platform that allows low cost, rapid launch of new instruments to design an antenna that is about 1 meter across of a very thin material, but then can fold up prior to launch and fit within the CubeSat architecture. Snoopy is going to be a technology demonstration mission, launch off of the International Space Station, and our plan is to collect data for about 6 months. ESCO's been a great partner. I mean, they're very good at working with universities, did the support under the ACT, Advanced Components Technology Program. And so then the next stage, would be to put together a design for a constellation of small satellites using Snoopy.
That's James Garrison, Professor of Aeronautics and Astronautics at Purdue University and Principal Investigator for the Snoopy project. This is Space Time. And time now to take another brief look at some of the other stories making news in science this week with a science report. A new study claims that long-term daily use of aspirin could help slow and even prevent the progression of colorectal cancer. A report in the journal Cancer looked at tissue samples of 238 patients who underwent surgery for colorectal cancer, 12% of whom were using aspirin. Compared with tissue samples from patients who did not use aspirin, samples from aspirin users showed less cancer spread to the lymph nodes and also showed immune cells were able to get into the tumors a lot easier. When they replicated the experiment in cells, the team found that cells treated with aspirin seemed to have more molecules that encourage immune cell activity, supporting the notion that aspirin may be supporting immune cells patrolling the area. The results indicate aspirin use could complement cancer prevention or therapy. A new study has shown that chimpanzees learn to improve their tool use as they age, learning and honing their skills throughout their lives. The findings, reported in the journal PLOS Biology, are based on observations of 70 wild chimps of various ages using sticks to retrieve food in a national park in West Africa. They found that as the chimpanzees aged, they became more skilled at employing subtle finger grips to handle the sticks, and these motor skills became fully functional by age 6. Beyond this age, chimps continued to hone their skills and displayed more advanced maneuvers, such as using sticks to extract insects from hard-to-reach places or adjusting their grip to suit different tasks. These skills seem to have become fully developed by age 15. The findings suggest that these skills aren't just a matter of physical development, but also of learning capabilities for new technological skills continuing on into adulthood. The new findings follow the release last week of a study by a team of German and Indonesian scientists who witnessed the first known example of a wild animal using a plant with medicinal properties to treat a wound. The observations, published in the journal Scientific Reports, involved a male Sumatran orangutan named Rakus, who was seen chewing up the leaves of a plant called Eka Cunning and then applying the resulting mush to a wound on his cheek repeatedly for several minutes. Now, interestingly, the same plant is used by local people to treat wounds and conditions including dysentery, diabetes, and malaria. After applying this improvised ointment to the wound for 7 minutes, covering it entirely, Rakus continued to munch on the plant's leaves for around half an hour. He then repeated the same procedure for several days in a row. And it worked. There were no signs of infection over the following days, and the wound had closed up within 5 days and fully healed within a month. The authors say that because Rakus repeatedly coated his wound with the plant material and then kept eating the leaves for half an hour afterwards, it's likely that he was intentionally treating the wound with a plant that he knew would help him heal. Among the most haunting of movie images are the final scenes of the 1970s horror movie, The Wicker Man. And while this story itself is fiction, there are stories of ancient pagan traditions which could well be the basis for such festivals. But as Tim Mendham from Australian Skeptics points out, some of these traditions are far more recent than you'd think.
There's a story that came out recently, just a historical article, looking at a town called, now I'm not quite sure of the pronunciation, Painswick, P-A-I-N-S, Wick, an English town that foreshadowed the Wicker Man concept. Now, let's talk about the town first and its ceremony. It sort of has a little ceremony started up in the 18th century by the son of a wealthy merchant who lived in the area who wanted to introduce a bit of a pagan festival where they all dance around and they have a statue of Pan, who was pretty much common in pagan festivals, etc. And the people are all crying or making lots of noises and things and possibly doing naughty things.
What do you mean by naughty things? You mean 2 scoops of ice cream instead of 1?
Absolutely, yeah, with lots of nuts on top. Or they had romantic encounters, or they drank too much, or they cheated at Scrabble. I don't know. But anyway, so there's this festival going on, a bit of a pagan festival. They weren't really pagans, but they're having a bit of a good time. They had a thing called Feast Sunday, which was supposed to be part of it, and naturally some of the local clergy weren't too keen on it. They were saying it's bad, etc. They'd eat puppy dog pie. Puppy dog pie is not made with puppy dog. Just the bowl is in the shape of a dog, so that becomes a puppy dog pie. And bow wow sauce, which also has nothing to do with puppies, etc. It's just a mixture of various concoctions. Apparently very interesting, nothing particularly nasty in there. And they did this for a while, from the 1700s, 1800s, until one clergyman who was there sort of, this is appalling, this is demonic, we have to stop this. And he stopped them doing it and took the statue of Pan and buried it. And another clergyman later on who heard about this festival thought it was an ancient, pre-Roman festival or something like that, dug up the statue and started it again, but then it died out.
Yeah, I thought it was Celtic too. I thought it was really old stuff. This is before the Druids.
Well, the whole concept of Druids is a bit dodgy as well. Right? There were Druids, but not necessarily the way they're portrayed in the middle of Stonehenge. Okay, there's a lot of stuff that's been made up since, romanticised, at about the same time as this, the 17th, 18th century, where the fascination with what's called megalithomania, with Stonehenge type things and all these stone circles, etc., became a real thing. And suddenly, rather than these stones which farmers hated because they were in the way, and they'd break them up and try to move them on because they couldn't plough their fields. Suddenly they become special. And some people suggested the giant stones, put there by giants, that because they're so big. Others saying it's pagan festivals, blah, blah, blah. Others saying it's druids involved, and the druids would not have been involved in any of these stone circles. Those stone circles predated very much any druid period, and the druids themselves became romanticised. So this festival in Painswick, I'm sure it's pronounced Panic probably, is a recent, if you could call a couple of hundred years recent, development for this clergyman who thought it'd be a good idea to reinstitute this ancient Celtic festival. They suddenly found out it wasn't, and then it stopped, and the statue was then put away in the local manor house gardens or something like that. Now, some people have been comparing this festival, this pagan festival, it wouldn't be the only one in Britain either, but comparing this one to The Wicker Man, which is interesting. The Wicker Man is a film from the 70s, starring Christopher Lee, vampire, Dracula, and Edward Woodward. Who was
I remember it well, yeah.
Yeah, Edward Woodward's serious actor. It's a good film. British film, scary. I won't give away the ending, but it's about this pagan festival where they build this huge wicker man. It looks like a man out of sticks, out of hay, or whatever they use, and it's so many tens of metres tall. And this policeman who's a strong Christian goes and investigates this pagan festival, and he meets up with all sorts of people dancing around, singing and doing naughty things. Again, the trouble is the Wicker Man film is based on a book called The Ritual, which is written by an writer who had an unsuccessful play that was never produced and then wrote it as a book, and the book became the film Wicker Man, except they didn't use much of the book in the film Wicker Man. But it's regarded as pretty good, pretty scary, pretty decently made film. There's a remake done fairly recently with Nicolas Cage, which everyone would prefer to forget. So therefore, the link between this Painswick festival, which doesn't happen anymore, and the Wicker Man is a bit tenuous. They just both are pagan festivals, and you'll find across Britain there's all sorts of pagan festivals, some of them more exciting than others. It's normally just fun. People dancing around and they stick little masks on and dance around a maypole, etc. And I think it's all very exciting. Half of these things have no ancient heritage at all. Others do, but it's an interesting thing, especially in England. Seems to happen a lot, actually. I'd rather go and see the Hellfire Club, which was a real sort of group of people about the same time as this was first invented, who used to do supposedly satanic rituals in High Wycombe, which is in the middle of England, run by a nobleman, and they used to drink a lot and probably do naughty things as well. Seems to be a common practice in England.
The whole idea of the Wicker Man, but that's the bit that interests me in this story. That's based on early pagan rituals, isn't it? Or isn't it?
Sort of. Again, it's a book, a fictional book that came out in the, I think, early 70s.
Yeah, the practice itself of building.
I don't know if the practice ever really happened. I don't know.
Ah, all right.
Yeah, I don't know. Is the Wicker Man a real thing? Is there a burning, like a Guy Fawkes type burning of an effigy? That stuff's probably been going on for a long time. Creating an animal or a person or something, and then there's a huge bonfire. Who knows? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that has been going on a long time. But whether the Wicker Man is based on an actual event like that, there's no indication that I've seen that the guy who wrote the book really based it on real things.
That's Tim Mendham from Australian Skeptics. And that's the show for now. SpaceTime is available every Monday, Wednesday and Friday through Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcast, Pocket Casts, Spotify, Acast, Amazon Music, Bytes.com, SoundCloud, YouTube, your favorite podcast download provider, and from spacetimewithstuartgary.com. SpaceTime's also broadcast through the National Science Foundation on Science Zone Radio and on both iHeartRadio and TuneIn Radio. And you can help to support our show by visiting the SpaceTime store for a range of promotional merchandising goodies, or by becoming a SpaceTime patron, which gives you access to triple-episode commercial-free versions of the show, as well as lots of bonus audio content which doesn't go to air, access to our exclusive Facebook group, and other rewards. Just go to spacetimewithstuartgary.com for full details. And if you want more space time, please check out our blog, where you'll find all the stuff we couldn't fit in the show, as well as heaps of images, news stories, loads of videos, and things on the web I find interesting or amusing. Just go to spacetimewithstuartgary.tumblr.com. That's all one word, and that's Tumblr without the E. You can also follow us through @StuartGary on Twitter, @SpaceTimeWithStuartGary on Instagram, through our SpaceTime YouTube channel, and on Facebook, just go to facebook.com/SpaceTime with Stuart Gary.
You've been listening to SpaceTime with Stuart Gary. This has been another quality podcast production from Bytes.com.